how do you spot a young person or a child who might be being abused?
That's really difficult because, like me, a lot of people hide behind a smile and academic achievement, so it's not easy to spot. But I think when you start to piece together the signs such as absences and other sort of signs like holding yourself back or not being able to go on play dates and things like that, then you can start to sort of potentially build a picture of a child that might be being abused. When you're younger, the child might know more about sex than they should. There's lots of different things to consider, but I think it would be unwise of me to list these are the 5 signs, for example. The only way anyone can really know if a child's being abused is by leaving the door of communication open. So it's communication, communication, communication.
I think the big question in most people's minds would be, how and why did you do the documentary? Because to experience what you experienced is one thing, but to be prepared to talk about it and to make it public is something else. So where did you find that strength from?
It's something that I've been actually thinking about for, 10 years. How can I use my voice to help make a change, a wider change? And by that, I don't mean just help inspire survivors. I'm actually talking mostly about people that haven't experienced sexual abuse or childhood abuse, people that might normally not want to talk about it. And since my time of being free, I have educated myself, thrown myself into the workforce, and I have become a master's degree qualified journalist. I've worked in lots of different newsrooms, and I've also worked in business. And through that journey, I learned how the power of media can sort of change public perception and obviously inspire people. So I thought, right, I think now's the time that I can help other people by showing them what I went through, and showing themes through my story that they can then understand, and sort of like see the situation more clearly. And I use those skills from journalism and business to help me do that, and ended up working with the most amazing team at Frank Films and Channel 4, who supported me 100%.
You talked about being free. When did you become free?
When I was 18 was when I spoke out. So essentially that was being free from this invisible prison that I grew up in. But actually, I'm still on that journey to being free from the impact of the long childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse and emotional abuse that I suffered at the hands of my dad.
When we talk about or think about paedophilia, most people, and it's actually easier to think of it this way, it's something outside. It's the horrible priest or vicar. It's the celebrity. It's the nasty teacher. And what you've done in this documentary is just make it very, very clear that in fact it happens very commonly in families. But this is someone who, obviously, I say obviously, it's not obvious, of course. I was fortunate enough not to have been the victim of that. And I grew up in a supportive family unit. But I found it very difficult to watch for all the right uncomfortable reasons. I found it hard to watch for the very reason you made the programme, I guess, which is that it's so difficult to confront.
That's something that the team and I percolated on over and over. We thought, how can we make this accessible and truthful? And our goal as a team was to help people lean into the conversation of childhood abuse and childhood sexual abuse in the same way that someone might lean into a conversation at the pub or over a coffee in regards to something sad like cancer or anorexia. This is a widespread issue within society. 1 in 6 girls and 1 in 20 boys are being sexually abused, often within the family. And when it is...
Sorry to interrupt, but do we know how often, as you say, it is in the family rather than by an outsider?
I don't know how often it is in the family, the latest stats on that, but more often than not, it's in the family.
Right.
And I think where it comes to light is a lot of people say about my mum. How does she not know? But when you sort of then look at the wider population, lots of people don't know that it's happening within their family. And I think that then goes to that point you made about the show being sort of like the film being uncomfortable, because you're having to face the truth. But quite honestly, it's actually a beacon of hope, because when you see the truth and when you see a problem, it's not until you do that you can fix it. So actually, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to embrace with educated, open minds and hearts, and work together to solve. And lots is being done now. I think the press reached 20 million people or more. 1.15 people actually watched the documentary end to end so far, and I think that shows that the public wants to lean into this now. They're willing and able and ready to have this conversation. And so I think that with that, you're starting to see things happen in government, in schools. So yes, it's a difficult subject, but it's one that we're all ready for, I believe.
Your father abused you really from an incredibly early age. You were barely a toddler, and it simply was it simply part of your everyday life?
Yeah, so it's if you think about it, the most important years, so they say, and when I say they, professionals say, are those early years when your brain's being formed as a child. And as my brain was being formed as a child, I was being abused emotionally, sexually and physically by my dad. And so trying to unpick those layers of subconscious when you're trying to rebuild yourself as an adult survivor is tough, because it did happen from such an early age.
You mentioned in the documentary that there were people who perhaps could, maybe should have intervened or noticed something. We'll talk about your mum in a moment, if you don't mind. But there was a teacher. There were lots of teachers in your life, of course, and there was also a friend's mother who she couldn't completely articulate it, but there was just something about your dad that she did not like. What do you think about those people outside the home who should have spotted that your life was not normal?
I'll go back to the point where it's sort of 1 of 6 girls and 1 of 20 boys. That means that it's taking my situation and then scaling it to all those other people that have been going through what I went through. There's always a teacher, there's always a friend's mum or a friend that might suspect something. And the reason we did the documentary is to encourage people to have those difficult conversations and not think, what if I'm wrong, but think, what if I'm right? Because actually, back then when I was a child, safeguarding wasn't a common practice or something that was widely used within schools. There just wasn't the education that a lot of people have now. But even though a lot of people have that education and they understand more about safeguarding, they still hesitate to speak.
Because once you've spoken, life will never be the same again, will it? And I have to say, from my perspective, I understand, I suppose, why people don't want to say anything, because they could bring down a succession of lives, end friendships or relationships forever. And it's a terrifying thing to do, but it's also exactly how abusers get away with it, isn't it?
See, I'm a mum now, and I completely know what you're saying. Like, I've had worries about children, and the thought of saying something initially, I get that fear, that initial sort of primal fear of, don't want to ruin my relationship with this person or impact their life if I'm wrong. It's natural. But actually, if you say something to the teacher or anonymously to a charity or the right people, people's lives don't get ruined at all. They everything's done in a very safe way. And so you're not, that fear is kind of over exaggerated, as a lot of fears are in our mind. And the reality is somewhat different.
But just in a practical sense, we'll go back. Just in a practical sense, Emily, you had a lot of time off sick from school. Now, why didn't the school or schools notice and do anything, or just question it?
when I was speaking with my head teacher, which you can obviously see in the documentary, he said, oh, perhaps he should have noticed those absences more. But I think because I was such a model student, the focus wasn't on me. It was on children who were showing clearer signs of neglect and behavioural issues. So I think that perhaps back then that came into play. But I've had a lot of responses, obviously, from the documentary. People are reaching out to me, and a lot of people from sort of the education sector, so teachers, have reached out to me, and there's been a similar message. And this is quote unquote what some people say. I am a teacher. It's my role to actually work in safeguarding with children and look at those absences, especially with those that have 50% or less attendance. And they said, watching the documentary that you created actually helped educate me in a different way on the importance of listening more carefully to that child, sort of reading between the lines. I think everyone, a lot of people are saying, you know, we're here, we're working with you in helping make this change, and thank you for doing for raising awareness on this. So I think it's reading between the lines and being more human, as well as having the knowledge of safeguarding, that makes all the difference.
And the other deeply uncomfortable thing about the documentary is that I think I'm a mother too, and any mother who watches that documentary will think, how did the mother not know? Did she actually know? But like many people in difficult relationships do, chose to compartmentalize and just get from one day to the next. It's so difficult because your mother was not the perpetrator, and yet at the end of the documentary, I'll be honest, I was furious with her. Do you understand? I'm sure you do understand that, don't you?
I think I completely respect people's opinion, and I am pleased that they're asking those difficult questions about my mum's position in what happened to me, because it's not until they ask them blatantly, like you have just kindly done, that you can address it. But, you know, I respectfully would say to any of these people, it comes from perhaps a place of ignorance in terms of you haven't been in those shoes, and where my mum was, you know, taken in a coercive sort of relationship. So I think it happened over many years before I was born. So my mum, I remember, clearly was in tears, and as there was like a police force raiding the house to find evidence, and she'd say, how could I not know? How could I not know? She was almost inconsolable. And the police officer at the time, not the one in the documentary, but another lovely chap, said to her, you know, paedophiles actually often seek out people and they hunt them. Like, they hunt for people that are nice and honest and have open hearts.
They're that calculating.
Some paedophiles, there are different types, but yeah. And so it's almost like they can seek them out to then exploit them. I don't know. I can't speak for what happened in my mum's case.
I think perhaps all viewers need to be more sophisticated in their thinking, and we should view your mother as another victim.
In my personal story, yes.
Yeah.
I can't say that would be the same in everybody's story, and I think there are some survivors have reached out to me anonymously and said that their mothers did know and chose to deliberately ignore or send them away to live with the granny and still stay with the father. So it's not always the case, like my mum, where she was being controlled in the way she was, but every sort of story is different. So I do understand where that opinion comes from, and it's really nice because so many people out there are so fiercely protective of their own children and children that they want to be like, you know, why didn't they want to see this? So I say thank you for that. That inherent sort of...
I absolutely don't mean to be overly critical of your mum. I mean, I certainly haven't been through anything how like that. How is she now?
She is passionate about helping people a bit like me. She's actually top qualified in safeguarding and working with professional education bodies in safeguarding.
Right.
So she's trying to make a difference in her own way.
And of course, she took part in the documentary, we should say. So, tell me then about when the abuse was happening. Did you tell anyone? Did you tell a friend?
No. I think because my story is complicated in a few ways, but then again, I think a lot of people can relate to what I went through. But when I was a young child, I was nearly deaf, and it wasn't until I was 8 that I had an operation, and that in its own way stopped communication barriers being open when I was a lot younger. But I think I was just so terrified of my dad because he was very violent as well. And that violence was there from as early as I can remember. So I was too scared to say anything out of fear of what might happen. Which is kind of why I've got lots of sort of charity bits that I'm trying to do in the background. And one of them is actually an education piece to different sectors and age groups. One's children and educating them on what they should expect from the people that are protecting them at school, at home, and that kind of thing. And I know the NCCC did a little bit of that. I actually sort of helped them with that. And then another thing is like actually educating parents in the prenatal classes on safeguarding and what to look out for and things in an accessible way, because you're having maybe your first baby.
Yes.
So I think it's a really important topic.
But we've got to be transparent and honest about this, because as your documentary makes clear and you've made clear in this conversation, it is happening. And if it's happening to 1 in 6 girls and 1 in 20 boys, we really need to talk about it. Can I just ask then about the point at which you decided to go to the police? What was the moment like where you just thought, I've got to do something about this?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And I had been sort of gearing up to saying something for a while, and then I spoke out initially to my friends, a friend and my mum, and then we all worked together to help the police arrest him. Well, my mum and friends helped in the background, and I was kind of in shock actually. And it took me sort of about a week to actually go and speak to the police and have a interview. My friend Elizabeth helped me to actually speak with them.
And it was because you had seen your dad interacting with a foster child, because incredibly he had been approved as a foster carer.
There's a lot more I could say on that subject.
Sure,
I'm not. There's certain things that we're looking into and may include in new films on that subject. But for now, all I'll say is yes, he was approved to be a foster carer, and he did abuse other children. And I noticed when you are a victim of sexual abuse or childhood abuse, you can spot the signs in others. You really can. And I saw one of them comforting him in the same way that I felt like I had to. It's very Stockholm Syndrome-esque, I would say. And so I was just like, I failed at protecting the other children. So now the right thing to do to protect them is speak out, I guess.
And the police have a lot of critics at the moment, they really do. But what your documentary illustrates is how they deal, some police officers day in, day out, are dealing with some of the most difficult areas of life. And from what I saw in the documentary, they were really caring and supportive.
I was really lucky to have a team of police officers who were just amazing. Honestly, just life-changingly amazing. I remember I got a parking ticket outside the police station and one of them got it paid for me, and then I nearly fainted in the interview and they ran to the vending machine and got me a chocolate bar. They went the extra mile. And I think that isn't the case for everybody. I have heard from other survivors they haven't experienced justice that they would like, but it's complicated. I gathered a lot of evidence before I went, and
Can I ask what kind of evidence you need in a case like that?
yeah, I think that's a really valid question, and I always try and be honest, even if I feel shy about it. But it's just sort of photos, and things that he had written to me, tech trails, like on a text message back then, tech from a long way, and things like that. So I gathered it all. There was a drawer of stuff that I hid at the back of under my bed, praying that it was never found, and I gave all of that to the police. But I just remember feeling very embarrassed to hand it over, to be honest. But that was a shame that I should never have carried.
Of course not. No. And the police, you in the documentary, you go and see some of the officers who are involved in your case, and they reveal some of what your dad said in his police interviews. Again, another part of the documentary. I've truly never seen anything like that on television, and we should say that not all of it is broadcast.
Mm.
But he was not prepared to take responsibility, seemingly.
No, I was quite shocked by that, to be honest. I think that I was expecting him to own up to what he did and feel guilty, but clearly he didn't, or in that moment at least, he was trying to dress it up as if it was not his fault, because he had been caught and didn't quite know what to do about that. And I'm just so grateful to those police officers and the press team for being part of the documentary. It will have a profound, and has already had a profound impact on people. But that revelation to me was gut-wrenching and sickening. And it took, like, you can see in the documentary me processing it, and I've now processed it. But still, it's a bit sort of incredulous to think. I think it starts to give an insight into the minds of some types of paedophiles, and how they allow themselves to get away with it. But when I was a young child, he was very pity party. I remember there are certain songs he likes. No one knows what it's like to be their bad mom, the kind of songs. So it confused me that his statement was like that, because I had seen elements of guilt as I was growing up.
We should say he got 14 years in prison. He has now been released, and he didn't want to take part in the documentary, although you did ask.
Yeah. I'm hoping that's not a closed door, because I would really like to understand more about what makes different types of paedophiles profiling paedophiles. And I think, if anything, the one thing that he could do is help on that journey. And I'd like to understand if paedophiles can be rehabilitated in any way. But he obviously was scared and put his therapy and the opportunity for a job first, because he's living in council housing. And so it wasn't surprising to me that he was sort of acting in a cowardly way.
I notice that you have referred to him as your dad, and in fact I have also called him your dad. But that's a sort of, it seems, a title that you have to earn, really, and he shouldn't be called that, should he? I mean, or are you just at a loose end as to what to call him?
Actually, between my friends and I, we just call him.
Right.
Well, some call him it. But for the purposes of the documentary and press work, I think people will get confused if I call him anything else. It's more to make communication clear. At home, I don't call him that at all. Actually, I hate that word. My stepdad's amazing, but I just can't. I don't like the word dad, and especially Father's Day approaching, you see it everywhere. But now I've now it doesn't shock me. Now it's not like a hit in the face every time you see it.
But it used to be like that.
Yeah, like I remember walking past card shops and looking at the ground, yeah, it was really difficult.
You've talked a bit about the signs, and I think it would be really unfair and unwise for us to end the interview without you just telling us really clearly and quite simply, if you can, what those signs are and what all of us as citizens have a duty to look out for. So how do you spot a young person or a child who might be being abused?
That's really difficult because, like me, a lot of people hide behind a smile and academic achievement, so it's not easy to spot. But I think when you start to piece together the signs such as absences and other sort of signs like holding yourself back or not being able to go on play dates and things like that, then you can start to sort of potentially build a picture of a child that might be being abused. When you're younger, the child might know more about sex than they should. There's lots of different things to consider, but I think it would be unwise of me to list these are the 5 signs, for example. The only way anyone can really know if a child's being abused is by leaving the door of communication open. So it's communication, communication, communication. And it's not asking a child a hard question like, are you being abused? Is he hurting you? It's nice, gentle, open questions. And actually repeating those conversations and having soft, gentle communication with the child over time and allowing them to come to you if you're worried. And then also, again, using those channels of support like schools and doctors and things that you can lean on.
Emily, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.